Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. My name is Kevin H. Shaw, and in tonight's episode we'll encounter a menagerie of menacing monsters, including mer-gremlins, an exploding Grim Reaper, and farting mudmen. From 1986, it's the chimeric horror movie Spookies. The movie that became Spookies actually began life as another project entitled Twisted Souls, and was directed by Brendan Faulkner and Thomas Duran, who also produced and wrote the screenplay with Frank Farrell. Now, without sounding like I'm running these guys down, after all they've made more movies than I ever have, their filmmaking resume isn't exactly great, having worked together on a number of small B movies and, well, as much as I'd like to dig into their careers, it's really not going to uncover anything earth-shattering. So for the purposes of keeping the episode moving, we'll just jump forward to the juicy bits. Shooting was completed in 1984, but due to a legal dispute with the movie's producer, Michael Lee, of Vipco distribution fame, it never went into full post-production, and so the unused footage sat locked in the video vault until Lee decided to resurrect the project in 1985. He hired a director by the name of Eugenie Joseph to shoot additional material, written by a new writer, Anne Burgund. Eugenie Joseph was an interesting choice, as her previous experiences in filmmaking were as an adult movie star, transitioning into writing and directing with 3 adult parody movies in the early 80s before being hired to direct the new material for this movie. She also served as the movie's editor and had a hand in the movie's sound editing, which we'll come back to later. Burgund, meanwhile, had a fairly limited career in writing for the screen, but did prove to be a worthy hire for Spookies, as she also worked on costume and set designs for these new scenes. And on a side note, she later went on to be an associate producer on the Jim Carrey comedy The Mask. Presumably due to legal issues, none of the original cast from Twisted Souls returned for these additional scenes, with Lee using an entirely new cast of actors, playing an entirely new roster of characters, none of whom share screen time with the original cast, which results in a unique movie experience. So, what's it all about? Well, the movie is, as you might imagine, essentially 2 movies that are intended to sell a single story, which they don't. But I'll try and give you a synopsis of the movie's events, and then break down just what's going on here as I look at which sequences were added later, and how they changed the original Twisted Souls plot. We open on Creon, who we later learn is an immortal sorcerer, talking to a coffin in which lies his beloved Isabel. Monologuing like a madman, he tells her that the fools required to resurrect her are on their way, that their lives will be sacrificed to give her life, and soon they will be together forever. This is the first of the scenes that was added to the original Twisted Souls footage, and Creon sitting around spouting such lines becomes a recurring motif as the movie progresses. Creon is played by Felix Ward, and it appears this was his only movie. Maybe he was the dad of one of the directors or something, I don't know. And although we're yet to meet her, Isabel is played by Maria Pachucas. She appeared in a number of adult thrillers and B-movies, most of which were directed by her husband Jay Lind, including an adaptation of J. Sheridan Le Fanu's Camilla, which we previously mentioned in my episode on Vampiros Lesbos. Anyway, at this point we're introduced to our first fool, Billy. He's a 13-year-old kid who, we learn, has run away from home because his parents forgot that today was his birthday. Billy is played by Alec Nemser, and continuing the tradition, he's another actor whose resume doesn't really hold any surprises. And look, I'm not trying to be negative or sound like I'm being all snooty and superior or anything. I've never appeared in a movie or made a career of being an actor, but I do know a lot of people who make their living this way, and I appreciate that it is hard to get ahead or find success in acting. I'm not meaning to denigrate anybody's success here. I'm simply stating that, this being a low-budget indie production, you're not going to find any performances here from people who were famous beforehand, or, if we're being honest, found fame afterward. Again, not a criticism, just an observation. Anyway, back to Spookies. As Billy walks through the grounds of Creon's house, which is also a graveyard, he's observed by Creon's servant, a rat-faced werewolf, beast man, cat, zombie, vampire thing. Get used to seeing this guy as he pops up repeatedly during the movie, even though he really has very little to do in terms of advancing the plot, and is there to simply make an attempt to make the two entirely separate shoots seem like one movie, and also to pad the runtime. Billy sits down against a tree, and we're then treated to what seem like a dozen shots of him reacting to a sound, and then going back to rummaging in his backpack, and then reacting to a sound, and then going back to, well, you get the idea. Pad the runtime. We then cut to a couple of cars driving along a narrow tree-lined road as one driver, Peter, complains about the other car's as yet unnamed driver who got them thrown out of a party for starting a fight. Now I know this seems very jarring, so I'm going to take a moment out here to explain who these people are and just the weird social dynamic that's going on here. Peter is a middle-aged man in a suit and is hanging out with, and dating one of, a group of younger characters who are a completely mismatched collection of random people. His girlfriend, who is possibly Linda or Megan, I honestly can't remember, and this forgettability is something I'll come back to, makes a point of saying they all grew up together, which I guess is intended to explain their disparate personalities, but also really doesn't. Anyway, Peter is mad because the group's alpha male Duke got them thrown out of a party by starting a fight, and as they're following him around looking for somewhere else to party, is even more annoyed with him because he believes Duke doesn't know where they're going. It's just so odd seeing Mr. Buttondown, probably an accountant, talking about partying like he's a teenager, and it's just one of the many things that make your brain implode as you watch this movie. It's really weird casting, and it makes me wonder if the actor playing Peter was also a producer on the movie or had some dirt on somebody. But to be fair, they don't even attempt to pass him off as being the same age as the others, and actually have his age called out at one point. So maybe we should be happy they at least show the audience some respect. But yes, he's angry at Duke. Duke is the archetypal New Jersey movie type. Headstrong, pig-headed, arrogant, and always ready for a fight. Now weirdly, I guess he didn't get the memo that this was a horror movie and not a sci-fi flick, as he's dressed like an extra from 1970s Doctor Who. Add to this mix a couple of English people, or at least one of them is English. I don't know what the accent is that the other one is doing. And then there's the world's most annoying, funny one, complete with an annoying puppet. He's not only about 10 years older than the others, but also annoyingly wears a t-shirt with a photo of himself with said puppet on it. Throw in some other utterly generic randos, and we have our cast. Now it's storytelling 101 that you include a character to serve as an entry point into the world of your story, and also be a character the audience can not only relate to, but also root for. In a horror movie, you want a character you can empathise with, who engages your emotions, so when they're in peril, they're basically acting as a surrogate for the viewer, so they'll feel the danger and hope the character survives. I wanted every single one of these people to die horribly the moment I saw them. And you will too. But you know what? The movie doesn't even give us that satisfaction. At least not in the way you'd like. Stick a pin in that, as we'll get back to it later. Anyway, the story cuts back to Billy. Remember the kid? And he's called Billy to make a Billy the Kid joke. Oh jeez. Anyway, the story cuts back to Billy, who has a conversation with a random hobo in the graveyard, discussing how his parents forgot that it was his birthday, and then he leaves. Creon's servant kills this drifter, and then pushes a tree into the road. We cut back to the annoying people in their cars, and a falling tree blocks their path. Do you see how cleverly they integrated the two separate shoots? No? Well, get used to that, because 90% of Creon's servant's screen time is spent holding doors shut while the Twisted Souls cast attempt to open them, or banging on doors while the original cast are in other rooms. Seamless and genius. Billy heads into the creepy old house and finds a birthday party has been set up for him there. For some reason, either because he's an idiot or the writer thought we were, he assumes this is a surprise party his parents have arranged for him, in an abandoned house, without telling him, or being there. Meanwhile, Creon's son, a kid in a Jawa costume and Spirit Halloween makeup, watches him. People being watched is a running theme in this movie, but, like everyone else in this film, really serves no purpose other than to pad the runtime. Billy gets sort of menaced by a battery-operated robot, twice, and then opens a gift and finds Creon's head in there, for some reason. And yes, for some reason seems to be another theme of this movie. Shocked, he runs away when it starts talking to him. And following a cut back to the people in their cars arriving at the house and then having a discussion about breaking in so they can party, we return to Billy, who is attacked by Creon's servant, who proceeds to bury him alive in about 6 inches of dirt. The party people go into the house and begin to party, which entails doing very little but poking around and having pointless conversations about how creepy the place is. Until one of them finds a planchette and ornate Ouija board, which then possesses one of them, and then they all run off, split up like idiots, and get killed by various monsters which are in the house, for some reason. This is intercut with footage of Creon, with his head back on his shoulders, talking to Isabel's semi-animated body who, as the stupid idiots who came to party die, gains more strength, explains she hates Creon, and then attempts to escape. Which is then intercut with footage of the possessed person operating the Ouija board, spouting dubbed dialogue that was intended to attempt to meld the movies together, and summoning monsters as and when needed. Now, like I say, the people who made Spookies made more movies than I ever have. They've had careers in movie making, however limited, that still exceeds what I've ever done in the medium. And I'm assuming somebody somewhere made some money from this. But the level of technical incompetence this movie displays is matched only by its utterly baffling, nonsensical plot and appalling acting. Which actually makes for a pretty decent So Bad It's Good movie. Now, I'm not saying this is a masterpiece, and I will acknowledge there will be times where you'll be finding yourself looking at the clock or wondering why nothing has happened for what seems like an hour, but those troughs are almost compensated for by a couple of things. Firstly, as I said, it's a terribly made movie for a number of reasons. The way the movie attempts to splice the two lots of footage together is initially quite amusing, but quickly descends into farce. Doors that were, in the original plot, simply sealed due to unexplained forces, are now all instead sealed because Creon's servant is just holding the doorknob. They use that about a dozen times or so, it seems. And then there's the constant cutting between what would, in TV parlance, be the A, B, and even C plots. So we have sequences of the partying people being menaced, only to then jump to Creon whittering on about controlling forces and his dead wife, then back to the unwilling guests in the house, and then the Ouija board sections, usually in hard cuts that don't follow the beats of any of the scenes. And this is made even worse by the fact that they keep splitting up into smaller groups. So we have at least 3 separate A-plot subplots going on there. The movie also manages to be hugely forgettable due to the way in which key events are presented. There are many scenes that are weirdly anticlimactic, and I can think of at least 2 scenes where characters are killed almost off screen or in a way that doesn't have any kind of impact. And that's not just because the characters are so unlikable. For example, one is thrown behind a desk in the middle of a fight in a way that's presented with no more gravitas or weight than any other similar scene. I genuinely had no idea the character in question was dead until I realised I hadn't seen them for a while, and then it dawned on me that, yep, that was their death scene. Now, speaking of characters, you've probably noticed I've stopped using names a while back, and that's because, a couple of standouts aside, they're all so generic they may as well not even have names. They're just here to walk around, say random things, and then die. Just to pad the runtime. The fact we're also supposed to accept these people are friends or even affiliated with each other is also nonsensical. There are at least 2 characters with a good 10 years on the others. There's at least 1 non-American. Their backgrounds and personas are completely mismatched. It makes no sense for them to even know each other, let alone want to party together. The Return of the Living Dead's approach makes sense, as the characters are all outcasts with common interests in music and outsider fashion. The disparate cast of Night of the Living Dead again works, as it's a group of people thrown together who then have to overcome their differences to survive. But here it's just a group of very different people who arrive together and then we're supposed to believe would want to spend their time partying with each other. And yes, I know I'm overusing the word partying, but that's basically the one thing that unifies all these randos. They all want to party, although as I say, that really amounts to very little other than talking and complaining about each other. No sex, no drugs, no rock and roll for these party animals. And then we come to the completely random collection of creatures in this movie. Now, don't get me wrong, these puppets, makeups and full body costumes are an absolute highlight of the movie, and mostly they look great. However, you know there's a big old but about to land here, and I don't mean the thing I'm sitting on. The movie presents us with a number of said creatures, including zombies, mudmen, mer-gremlin snake creatures, an animated Grim Reaper statue, a spider woman, a deadite-like possessed character, and a strange tentacled creature, and, on the whole, they're really effective. But what's not so great is the way in which, like the cast of the characters, it's just a grab bag of whatever they thought would be cool with no unifying theme or explanation as to why they're even there. Oh, okay, so that's not strictly true. There is some attempt to explain this mismatched band of beasties. At one point, one of the characters discusses how the house was the home of an occultist or ghost hunter, and that somehow these twisted souls are now being kept prisoner in the Ouija board. But that's a pretty weak explanation, and I wish they'd just been a little bit more inventive with that. As I mentioned though, the creatures themselves are pretty cool. The makeup on the possessed partygoer is nicely done. The mer-gremlin snake goblin things are like the offspring of an encounter between a boglin and a ghoulie, and both the tentacle monster and the spider woman have really impressive full body suits and makeup, the latter having multiple stages of transformation that are all nicely realised. There's also a ghost witch that appears in the newly filmed segments that's equally as impressive, coming off as a cross between the Crypt Keeper and Terror Hawks' Zelda, and it's a really cool puppet. And then we do have some pretty neat zombies, and note I said some, as others are just terrible. But their appearance becomes tiresome pretty quickly due to the fact that we have a full 5-minute sequence in which a character is chased by the undead, only to fall twice, but then get up and just keep running, all the while accompanied by the shortest, most annoying loop of synthesizer score you can imagine. All together now. Pad the runtime. And sadly, the producer Michael Lee couldn't leave well alone, and so decided that the Mudmen, who were created for the original movie's cut, would be so much more menacing if he added farting sounds to their scenes. This was actually a point of contention with all involved, but he did get his own way, and so yes, the hulking mud golems attack their enemies while letting out a combination of little Tommy squeakers and a rolling thunder of flatulence. Because nothing says terrifying horror movie like farting monsters. Spookies is one of those weird movies where you really wonder what was going through the heads of those who filmed it, but also who they thought they were making it for. Now granted, the original movie Twisted Souls seems to have been a kind of Evil Dead meets Waxworks sort of affair, and whilst it's hard to say how successful that approach was due to it being recut with the new footage of Spookies, I have to say that a lot of the original movie does appear to be people just wandering around and not doing a lot. And there's not really much in the way of scares. As I say, it's hard to figure out what the point of this movie was. It's R-rated, but the gore is fairly minimal. None of the partying people actually go off to party, so there's no gratuitous or indeed any sex scenes. And even when one character is pawed at by zombies and they tear at her clothes, she still remains fully clothed. I'm not saying all horror movies have to have nudity, but generally most B-movies will throw in a few boobs just to keep things interesting. And given the new director's background in adult movies and the fact that 2 of the female cast appeared in adult features, it's just surprising they didn't exploit this to spice things up a bit in the usual low-budget movie manner. But this movie, with the inclusion of Billy, the farting mudmen, and the actually kinda cute mergoblin snake gremlins, it just feels more like an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark or Goosebumps, right down to the grinning skull on the movie's logo and, yeah, even the name. It even feels like it was written by a kid, being a prime example of and then storytelling, and the characterization of the various protagonists and antagonists, which is basically non-existent, and makes them just feel so unrealistic in their actions and behaviours. For example, there's a fantastic scene where Peter, the old guy, is trapped in a room with some other random people, and coming up with an escape plan, he tells them to move away from the door, and then launches himself head first through it. It would make Ralph Wiggum proud. Another example of this is a sequence where one character becomes separated from the group. He's locked in a room and they know he's facing danger within, but after their initial minimal attempts to open the door fail, they decide to go off and look for another way in, which involves walking away to the other side of the house and then forgetting about him. Maybe it's just a result of the bad editing, or maybe it's just bad writing, but the thing is that Spookies is such a mess of a movie, well, 1.5 movies, that it's impossible to really know where the blame lies. It's certainly an oddity. On the one hand, it's hugely boring for stretches of time, alternating between people just walking about and the inserted scenes of Creon muttering about power and love, or his servants skulking around looking in windows and holding doors shut. But then there are moments of, not exactly brilliance, but fairly impressive practical effects, with some nicely realised full body suits, cool puppets, and even some stop frame animation all thrown in for good measure. In more competent hands, these creatures would have been at the fore of the movie, and with a better plot and an actual vision for them, it could have been great. As I mentioned, we get the spirits trapped in the Ouija board concept, but it's fairly weak, and instead maybe each could have been tied to a cursed item or come alive from the pages of a book of demons or something. The cursed Ouija board concept doesn't even work anyway if you think about it, as they're not even ghosts. I always say that the worst sin a movie can commit is being boring, but the second biggest sin is that of wasted potential. Of a movie that would have been a great first draft and, with a bit of work, could really be something. Now sadly, Spookies is guilty of committing both of these sins for much of its runtime. But if you're a fan of bad movies and you know what to expect from pretty much all of them, i.e. terrible acting, zero character development, and many, many moments of nothing much happening, then you'll probably find something here to catch your attention, as when the monsters show up, the movie certainly picks up too. And there's also some fun to be had playing Spot the Join, when they attempted to weld the new and old footage together. But for everybody else, well, I'm sure you'll find this stinks even worse than those stupid farting mudmen. And on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of Real Obscure. This episode of Real Obscure was written, produced and re-edited into another podcast by me, Kevin H. Shaw. If you enjoyed it then, please be sure to like, subscribe and turn notifications on. You can also support us on YouTube using the thanks option to make a financial donation, or share the episode to your social media pages. Comments are always welcome, and you can email your thoughts to hellorealobscure@gmail.com. You can learn more about the podcast by visiting realobscurepod.com, and I'm on Blue Sky with the handle @realobscurepod. Spookies is copyright 1986. All content here is used for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holders. Presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended, so please don't sue me or make me watch this movie again.
you.